If you shopped at a fast fashion store, visited a mall, or went to any kind of an event in the summer of 2024, you're probably gonna recognize this melody instantly. Sabrina Carpenter's Espresso was an inescapable phenomenon last year. The Grammy-winning track spent time on Billboard charts in over 24 countries and has racked up nearly 2.5 billion streams on Spotify. It was also used to brand martini kits and Starbucks drinks, got featured heavily on SNL 50, and most importantly of all, it got a Fortnite emote. And honestly, I get the appeal. The song has an incredibly catchy melody, a silly sing-along chorus, great pop production, and just comes across as immediately likable. But countless other songs with these same qualities come out every year, and most of them don't reach nearly the same heights of popularity as Espresso did. Skill is definitely one aspect, but luck, timing, and promotional methods matter a great deal as well. And sometimes the methods employed to promote a song can range from shady to legally dubious. Now, to be clear, this video is not an anti-Sabrina Carpenter rant. She is a talented, beloved artist, and I have no ill will towards her specifically. What I do want to talk about, however, is how figures in the music business have a vested financial interest in dictating the music you listen to, and how they will get you to do this by any means necessary. This is not something entirely new. It's just the way that this is happening is changing in the age of streaming. Before I get to that point though, let's talk about how we got here, how these shady under-the-table deals got normalized in the first place. So basically, in the 1930s and 1940s, the music industry was undergoing a massive change. Radio was in its golden age, rapidly overtaking pluggers to become the most popular way to introduce audiences to new artists. For context, pluggers were musicians hired by various stores to play new songs in an effort to sell sheet music, the primary way to purchase music before vinyl was introduced. Initially, there was little scrutiny over what songs were being played on the radio and why. NBC's Your Hit Parade was a popular radio show at this time that compiled and played a list of the chart toppers of the week. The announcer introduced the show by letting the audience know that the people have spoken. Many Americans tuned in every Saturday to check if their favorites made the list. Bets were made on which tracks would be featured. But, and keep this next point in mind, there was no clarity on how these tracks were chosen, aside from vague statements released by the agency behind the show claiming that a large team compiled the list using a quote-unquote infallible system. As John Dunning points out in his Encyclopedia of Old-Time Radio on the air, it didn't matter if the hyperbole had any scientific validity. The people believed it. But by the 1950s, public scrutiny against radio stations was at an all-time high, particularly as a result of pressure applied by the aforementioned pluggers. An October 1949 Billboard article on this matter foreshadows the fiasco that would arise in a decade's time. It says, "The specter of Payola is haunting the music business as never before, and the song pluggers, one of the most jeopardized groups, are determined to exorcise the evil." Sure enough, tensions continued to rise in the 1950s, and by 1959, the first Payola congressional hearings took place. In these investigations, the US Congress learned that music publishers were bribing DJs to play their songs on air, and that this practice was so widespread that it was seen as a normal part of the business. This is the textbook definition of Payola. Now, most of the music being promoted using this method was rock and roll, a genre considered scandalous at the time. And because of that, the backlash was immediate and intense. DJs around the country were in deep trouble. Alan Freed, the most popular American DJ at the time, was terminated from his job, among many others. However, some, like Dick Clark, slyly talked their way out of the situation and got away with nothing more than a slap on the wrist. For context, some of these DJs were taking bribes upwards of $22,000 to play certain songs. So, of course, in the aftermath of these hearings, amendments were passed that explicitly outlawed playing sponsored music without notifying listeners. The situation also increased the American public's distrust in mass media and played a role in the rise of the 1960s counterculture movements. DJs also lost the right to directly decide the programs for their shows. Despite the outlawing of Payola, scandals continued to pop up up in the 70s and 80s, and in 1986, major labels dropped independent promoters amidst new investigations. At this time, the music industry was undergoing another big change. Television had begun to take over radio, with channels like MTV becoming the new go-to destination for music recommendations. Still, radio retained its popularity to a large extent, and in the early 2000s, two new Payola scandals arose. I won't go into this in too much detail, but on a very surface level, thousands of email chains revealed that major labels were still bribing radio stations to play certain records. Major labels like Sony, Warner, Universal, and EMI settled out of court for a cumulative $30 million plus in a 2002 case, and four massive radio companies paid a $12.5 million fine in 2007. That is to say, it was clear that the practice of Payola was well and alive. The beginning of the 21st century also marked the internet age, and with this, the production and consumption of music underwent yet another massive change. Perhaps its most significant one yet. And with this, Payola changed too. The early days of the internet were pretty much a Wild West scenario. P2P file sharing services like Napster and LimeWire let millions of users download songs for free. However, these were shut down within the decade owing to obvious concerns over copyright infringement and piracy. The big shift, however, came in the 2010s with the advent of streaming platforms. As music went from being played on radio to television to the internet, what remained constant was the fact that if you liked a song, you could go and purchase a copy of it for yourself. Sure, we went from sheet music to vinyl to cassettes to discs to digital downloads, but the normal thing throughout all this was that you like a song, you purchase your own copy of it. But then in 2016, for the first time, streaming overtook the combined sales of digital, CD, and vinyl in the USA, and the growth has continued since. What this meant was that instead of discovering music via the radio or television, then purchasing a copy of said music to keep listening to it, more people were choosing to subscribe to an endless library to both discover and continually access the music they like. As Alan Krueger discusses in his excellent 2018 work, Rockonomics, this meant that our relationship with music shifted from an a la carte style to a buffet style in lieu of this new subscription model. Basically, instead of having a small curated collection of albums that you play regularly, akin to an a la carte menu at a restaurant, you have access to an endless buffet of songs that you can listen to whenever, however, as long as you keep paying the platform a recurring fee. This has massive implications for the music industry, including the artistic value we give to an artist, the per unit earnings that an artist gets from their songs, and even the way music is produced. Additionally, at a buffet, food items are placed strategically to ensure that you fill up on cheaper dishes to keep the restaurant's costs low and margins high. In a similarly cunning manner, streaming platforms like Spotify utilize different features to ensure that you keep listening to music that best suits their financial interests. Spotify's editorial playlists, radios, and the autoplay feature all are arguably great tools for music discovery, based on algorithms that understand what you like and recommend similar music. The way this works is that if an artist has discovery mode turned on for a song, Spotify will increase the likelihood of it showing up in their editorial playlist, but reduce royalties paid out to artists. Positive signals toward the algorithm further increase this likelihood. Spotify claims that multiple factors go into skewing the algorithm towards certain songs. No further details are publicly available. Sounds familiar, but I mean, it's an algorithm, it's completely unbiased, it's simply extrapolating data. Which, I mean, makes sense, it would be alright if it weren't for the fact that Spotify keeps recommending songs that feel incredibly out of place at times. For instance, in 2018, many songs from Drake's Scorpion were showing up in unrelated lists like Hot Hits UK soon after the album's release. Similarly, users have reported Billie Eilish's Lunch playing first for them repeatedly whenever autoplay was used. And an Enemy article from 2014 explores how Sabrina Carpenter's Espresso was taking over the Spotify algorithm, showing up in hip-hop radios, being played alongside any songs that users put on, or being recommended to people that never hinted at having any interests in the artist's previous music. But so what? I mean, maybe the algorithm's just, messing up now and then. Maybe it's just accidentally recommending certain songs to the wrong people. I guess so. I just think it's funny how most of the time when this happens, the song falls into one of two categories. The first of these are fake artists, which is just an entirely different can of worms, and maybe I'll get into that in a later video as well. But in a nutshell, there have been numerous well-documented allegations over the past 8 years that Spotify has repeatedly put music by fake artists on its playlist to cut down on the commissions they have to pay. That alone is scummy as it is. And the second category here is artists whose success has direct financial benefits for Spotify. Going back to the Sabrina Carpenter example, her label, along with Billie Eilish and Drake's labels, are in turn owned by Universal Music Group, which owns shares in Spotify and vice versa. As Dr. Chris Anderson, an associate professor of cultural economy, puts it, these major corporations are therefore linked to each other financially in various ways, while Spotify is reliant on the major labels in particular for access to the catalogs of music that are driving its growth. It needs to play to their tune. This is undoubtedly a big reason behind why these major label artists tend to be recommended at a disproportionate rate. And if it were happening like once or twice, it would, I guess, still be fine. But with research showing that our algorithmic appreciation, or the blind trust that we have in these algorithms, is beginning to surpass even human guidance, this is incredibly concerning. In other words, the new Payola evades accountability by essentially blurring the lines between what is a genuine recommendation and what is a paid sponsorship. Now, algorithmic discovery in of itself is not an absolute evil. It has helped thousands of artists gain exposure and has to an extent democratized the music industry. But at the same time, the lack of clarity on how these recommendations are made and the fact that it reopens avenues for these shady under-the-table deals is worrisome. Streaming plays a big part in defining our taste. The implication is if you like X, you will definitely like Y. And since we trust these algorithms to make these recommendations for us, streaming platforms are able to exploit this trust. If the algorithm suggests that I can be a Sabrina Carpenter fan, maybe I should be one. And listen, I'm not saying that we should completely just stop using these streaming platforms, though maybe consider moving away from Spotify since Daniel Ek is essentially an evil warmongering bastard. All I'm saying is that we should be mindful of what these platforms recommend, keeping in mind that they're prioritizing their self-interest at the end of the day. And if you are able to, consider purchasing albums to support the artists you love. Simply put, streaming platforms are great tools for music discovery, but they have also opened up new opportunities for major labels to promote their music in discreet, unethical ways. Some of the songs that you've discovered and fallen in love with via a streaming platform might be absolute bangers, but the fact that you came across them in the first place was probably more by design than you might think. Payola didn't die when streaming killed the radio star. It simply changed its face. Thanks for watching.